This is chapter 17, section 4, and it's on domains and kingdoms. The key concept here is that the current tree of life has three domains. Um, so the first video on 17.1, when we were talking about Linnaeus, I mentioned that acronym, Did King Phillips Come Over for Good Soup? Where the D was referring to domains, and then kingdoms, um, class, order, phylum, uh, etc., etc. I'd have to write down the acronym and remember the rest of them. But the idea is that there's different levels to life, and there's different classifications. Um, so classification, it's always important to remember it's a work in progress. So it's something where um, back in 1866, or rather before then, whenever we first started doing this work, there was only two kingdoms. We called them Animalia and Planta. And basically, it was just, when people were classifying organisms, they made it pretty simple. They made them, we said, oh, there's animals and there's plants. It just kind of kept it as simple as that. They didn't know about cells at that point. So the idea of, oh, what about bacteria, and other unicellular or just, or fungi or whatever, they didn't really worry much about that. It's just animals and plants. Then, as microscopes improved and we were able to see single cells, right at 1866, so after 1866, they introduced all the single-celled organisms, all the organisms that were made of just one cell. They put into another kingdom called Protista. Okay, and then 1938, we created another kingdom. We called that kingdom Monera. And Monera was just referring to all the prokaryotes. And if you recall, prokaryotes um, were organisms like bacteria, where they're single-celled, only one cell. Um, However, they have no organelles and no nucleus. Whereas Protista, these are single-celled organisms that are eukaryotic cells. If you remember eukaryotic cells, the word eukaryotic cell starts with EU, and you pronounce it U, and so you remember eukaryotic cell by U. You are made of eukaryotic cells, so you have cells that have a nucleus where the DNA is located. You have organelles. Organelles are like those little machines that are in cells, like the mitochondria that makes energy, the Golgi apparatus. These organelles were like different parts of a factory. The Golgi apparatus that packages and stores proteins, endoplasmic reticulum, all these different organelles. So we took these prokaryotes and we put them all into one kingdom called Monera in 1938. Well, then again, as more research came out in 1959, we made another kingdom, and we called that kingdom Fungi. So that came about as we were, beginning to understand the environment more, and we identified fungi as these plant-like organisms. So like your mushrooms are fungi, and what fungi do is they just break down dead organisms. They're kind of like the recyclers of the ecosystem, or recyclers of the world. Code word bread. Okay, and so we took fungi and we just moved them to their own kingdom. We said, all right, we're going to put the fungi over here and let them decompose the dead organisms. All right, then in 1977, we discovered that, hey, the kingdom Monera, it's actually a little more complicated than just, one single kingdom, and they broke it up into two: bacteria and archaea. And I'll get into what archaea mean here in the coming slides. Code word bagel. Okay, the three domains in the tree of life down here are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. And remember, domains are above the kingdom level. They were the did in that little memory phrase I gave you. Um, in the first video, where underneath domains you have your kingdom. Uh, these domains were determined by um, rRNA studies by Carl Weiss, studying prokaryotes. And rRNA, this little r, that's referring to ribosomes. And ribosomes, if you remember back to protein synthesis, ribosomes were those little structures where the proteins were made, where you took the RNA to the ribosome and it stitched together the amino acids to make up the protein, where the amino acid was the monomer and the protein was the polymer. So the domain bacteria is pretty simple because it just has one kingdom, that's bacteria. Same with domain archaea. It's pretty simple, just has one kingdom, and that's archaea. Then domain eukarya um, is kind of all the rest of them, where you have the protista, plantae, fungi, and animalia, where it's called domain eukarya because they have the eukaryotic cells. All of these kingdoms contain organisms that have cells that contain a nucleus and contain the organelles. Whereas these other two domains are made of prokaryotic cells, which are the cells that have no nucleus and no organelles. And then this right here is your cladogram, this little phylogenetic tree where you have the branching off points, where these are all, this would be common ancestors, of these bacteria and so forth, where this is the common ancestor of all of life, this kind of elusive common ancestor down here. So just to, kind of tie everything back together. All right, so getting into some of the more specifics of the domains. Domain bacteria, again, it has the prokaryotes. It's going to be arguably the largest group on Earth. Code word Lyme. And they're classified by shape, where some of the bacteria are a spiral shape, like this bacteria right here. Some of them are more of a round tubular shape, and then some of them are call it cocci, like those little circular shape bacteria. Those are the kind of the three general sizes. Rod bacteria, what they call these, because it looks like a little rod. Classified by shape, classified by the need for oxygen. So, we need oxygen to survive, and so do some bacteria, but some bacteria don't need oxygen to survive. So think of like how milk gets contaminated. The bacteria in that milk didn't need bacteria to survive. However, some bacteria need oxygen to survive. Again, no organelles or nucleus. Then the domain archaea. Archaea are still prokaryotes. They're still these single-celled organisms that have no nucleus and no organelles, and they're the same thing as bacteria, except their cell walls. And to remind you, the cell wall, if you're drawing a bacteria, the cell wall is that very outside part of the cell. So this is the cell wall right here, and then the cell membrane was this right here, this second little layer right here. Remember, some eukaryotic cells have a cell wall. Us animals, we just have the cell membrane. In your archaea cells, the differences in them were discovered by studying the RNA between your archaea and your bacteria. And what makes archaea unique is that they can live in extreme environments. So extreme is referring to extreme hot or extreme cold. So these archaea can live in super hot springs where it's hundreds of degrees Fahrenheit. I don't even know what I'm writing right here. I'm trying to write cold. Or they can live in extreme cold that's way too cold for any other organism to live. And what allows them to live in these extreme temperatures is the differences in their cell walls. They have this slight difference in the chemistry that make up these cell walls that will allow them to survive these extreme temperatures. And also, they can handle extreme differences in salt. So areas that are super duper salty where any other organism would just shrivel up and die. These organisms, because of their cell wall chemistry and the little differences in how their cell walls are made up, they can handle that extreme difference in salt as well. Excuse me. Then domain eukarya. Again, it's very very broad. It's basically everything else in life. Protista is the only one I kind of want to highlight, and protista are single-celled organisms. They only have one cell, but that one cell has organelles and it has a nucleus. It's a eukaryotic cell. Whereas the bacteria and the archaea, they're one cell, but that one cell is a prokaryotic cell where it doesn't have the organelle or the nucleus. So final slide is just kind of making note that bacteria and archaea can often be difficult to classify, and that's because they can transfer genes between each other. So this would be a bacteria and this is a bacteria, and they can just build this little bridge between them, between each other, and then right in this bridge they're transferring DNA. Whereas normally bacteria, they just divide by just, they always divide by just asexually, where they just, just break off in half. They just divide by mitosis. However, they can transfer DNA between each other. And because they can transfer DNA between each other, it kind of makes it difficult to say, well, this is one species right here, and this is a different species, when all of a sudden, these two things are transferring DNA, so it kind of is like, well, what is a species and what's not? So as a result, there's going to be more research needed to understand prokaryotes. Code word book. All right, that's going to do it.